Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Fit for the Future webinar. And thank you to everyone who's registered and joined us this evening. My name's Andy Rose, and I'm president of the OMT Society. And in your time as president, you are asked to identify a theme, and my theme is Fit for the Future. That, not coincidentally, is the name of tonight's webinar as well. So what do I mean by fit for the future? Really, in this very fast changing world, developments in technology, robotics, artificial intelligence, everything is digital online, including this evening's event. We're living with the impact of climate change. And what Fit for the Future really is about is exploring what skills we need to learn in ourselves to be fit for the future. And my guess is the audience tonight, I don't know exactly who's with us, but probably the age range is anywhere from 15 to 85. So the individual challenges that we individually face are vary quite dramatically. It could be for the younger generation, what skills you need as you plan for a career, all the way through to making sure that you have the skills to log on and register for an online webinar. So this evening, we're going to explore that the impact these incredible changes are having in three very different areas and professions. While very different, I also think as we explore these sectors, we'll identify a lot of common themes as well. So the key role for me as chairman of this session is to have an excellent panel of speakers. So I think I already ticked my box as having achieved my main task, because we really do have a great panel. Two of our three speakers are closely associated with the school, and please feel free as you introduce yourselves to share that. I'm not going to do introductions of the individuals, and I'll ask each speaker if they would just to spend a little bit up front introducing themselves. The way we're going to run the session this evening is each speaker will speak for about 10 minutes. And then for the balance of the time, so the second half, we'll do Q&A. And please do, if you have questions as we go along, please do use the chat room to ask your questions, and I'll pick those up as we go along and try and sort through those. We've already received some questions in advance. So our first speaker tonight is Clara Barby. And while I've said no introductions, I do want to mention that Clara very recently was awarded a CBE in the New Year's Honours List about a month ago. Clara, who I work with on a board, is very modest, and she will not thank me for mentioning that, but I think it is worthy of mention, and congratulations, Clara. So a big thank you to our panelists, and also a big thank you for Nick and Emma in the development office for all the effort that they've put in helping us to coordinate. And again, thank all of you for participating. As you will hear, we're very lucky to have this panel. They are three very busy professionals, and we're fortunate to have them to share their expertise with us. And on that note, I will introduce Clara to start us off this evening.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be with everyone. I'm going to tell you a little bit of a personal story to land a couple of key points. And I hope what you take away from the next 10 minutes is, regardless of whether you look at what's happening with climate change and you see it as something that you want to embrace and be active and be a part of, or you see it as something that you just need to deal with, I'm going to tell you that the time has come. It doesn't matter which way you look at it, the time has come. And I'm going to tell my own story to illustrate I'm definitely in the camp of I want to do something about it. And I'm going to talk to you about what that has meant for me and how actually it has unleashed, from my perspective, a wave of people who now realize they don't have to choose between purpose and business. So I'm going to tell you that story. And then I'm going to speak to any of you who may feel skeptical and frustrated by this and wondering whether you can carve a career without being affected by climate. And I'm going to illustrate for you why I think that is impossible. So I'm not going to dwell on climate change, so that you can read a lot about it. But it is, I think, for our generation of people, and by that I mean the multiple generations that are probably on this call right now, for us lot, it is a it is going to be, I think, the defining issue for us. We, for the first time, have the means to stop it. I would argue we didn't perhaps have them before, and I'll give some examples of technologies. We have the means to stop it, and we are the last ones who can stop it. So it's a very, very meaningful issue for all of us to grapple with. Now, my personal story is that I am currently the founder, one of the founders, and the senior partner of a firm called Just Climate, which we set up. I'm also on the management team of a firm called Generation Investment Management, and Just Climate is our new business. Now, Generation goes back nearly 20 years, and it was founded by Al Gore, who won the Nobel Prize for his work on climate change, obviously having nearly become president of the United States, and has been a very, very loud and powerful voice for us all doing something about it. Al is now chair of our advisory business at Just Climate, and it has been an honor to build this new climate dedicated investment business under his leadership. What we're doing is investing in technologies which can address what we call the hard to abate sectors, the sectors which, if we don't decarbonize them, we cannot get to a net zero world. So think about steel, think of cement, think of aviation fuel, think of long haul transport. I'm afraid they're not very sexy sectors, to be honest, but if we do not decarbonize them, then we don't have a hope of getting to net zero. And they've been notoriously hard to abate. So we are focused exclusively on really interesting technology solutions for those sectors. But I actually wanted to go back to the beginning of my journey and talk about how climate for me has made me realize that being fit for the future means you don't have to choose between purpose and business. Because I started out actually working in what you might think of as development or even philanthropy. We were looking at how to create clean energy access in emerging markets to some of the poorest communities in South Asia and East Africa. And we were using distributed solar home systems to do it, and small scale hydro and biomass plants. And it was the question I was faced with at the time. I thought I was going into it to do what you might think of as social work originally. And I very quickly bumped into this fascinating question, which was a pure business question, which was, actually, this shouldn't be funded by grants. This should be funded by whatever business model will allow us to achieve the maximum social impact for the minimum cost. And it quickly took me from a grants-based model into what you might think of as a social enterprise or social business model. And I became a business person, even though I had started out purely as a person focused on purpose and development. And I spent many years then working on businesses and investment. And today the firm I run is a completely commercial investing firm. We have pension funds as our largest clients. And I wouldn't consider myself a development person anymore, even though every single investment decision I make includes looking at, am I abating as much greenhouse gas emissions as I possibly can with this technology, which is fundamentally a purpose question. So it's been a really interesting journey for me, realizing that you can be in business or finance or development and actually end up needing to have all of the dimensions in every decision you make. And I hope all of you, as you consider what you do next, will realize that you can build purpose into that choice. I wanted to close on the illustration of why I think this is going to hit you, even if you aren't yet motivated by purpose. And I want to illustrate the accounting profession. We have moved in the last 18 months only from a situation where if you decide that you want to train as an accountant, and maybe even you want to be strategic and have a chief financial officer role as your ultimate destination, that job is no longer just about accounting standards. Last year, I led a project which was a huge honor to lead, to set up an international sustainability standards board that now sits alongside the International Accounting Standards Board. And both of those boards work together and sit under the supervision of securities regulators around the world. It is a financial system, and yet it's now got a sustainability standards board. So when people become accountants now, they will no longer just be looking at assets and liabilities in the traditional way and focusing on a very narrow definition of finance. They will be trained in how to audit and prepare statements that include sustainability related financial disclosure. And it will be compulsory. Regulators will regulate this form of disclosure. And actually, my closing comment is, if your original aspiration was to be a chief financial officer, what we're starting to see is that even the name is changing, and they're starting to be called chief value officer roles, recognizing that actually the success of business and finance is about managing your impacts and dependencies on a broad range of stakeholders for whom you create value, rather than a very, very narrow definition that we've had historically. So Andy, I'm going to stop there because I know there's a couple of us to speak.
Very good. Thank you, Clara. And I'm sure we will come back to you in due course with the questions. I'm now going to move on to Dr. Matt Williams, who is going to talk about how the medical profession is or is not being impacted by some of these changes that we've been discussing. And he's got a very nice whiteboard behind him. So Matt, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good timing. Sorry, my phone goes off. Right. Sorry. So thank you very much for inviting me. So my name is Matt Williams. I'm an oncologist at Charing Cross, where I treat adult brain tumour patients. I also run a research group at Imperial College, which is the computational oncology group. So we spend our time trying to build AI things for people mainly with brain tumours, but with cancer generally. So I'm going to give a short talk. I've got very few slides and they're not particularly informative. Most of them are images that I've Googled. And I suppose the first thing I should really say is that I'm probably not going to give the talk you might think I might be about to give. So I'm not going to talk about this. I Googled this afternoon. This is what comes up if you Google laser robot surgery. And you can tell that this is about robot surgery because the lights are turned out. I've no idea why the lights are turned out, but in pictures like this, they always are. This is not what I want to talk about when I talk about AI in medicine, and I'll try and explain why. So the first thing is, I put a couple of quotes up. The top one, some of you might know about. It's a quote by a writer called William Gibson, and I think picks up something interesting about the fact that what might happen more generally is already here in bits and pieces. And the second one is a reminder that healthcare does not lead to health, which I will point out as a doctor is a profoundly depressing state of affairs, because I like to think that I make people healthy and the data shows I don't. For those of you who don't believe me, this is a lovely graph. This is mortality rate from TB in the US. And unfortunately, it's got the dates on it. But as you can see, almost all of the reduction in TB mortality occurs before we developed any treatment for TB. So the reduction in TB mortality was not caused by medical care treating people with TB better. And that is largely true across most of healthcare. And then the second thing I'm going to say is that, as many of you will be aware, there are a variety of problems in the NHS at the moment. They're all over the news. Today is, I think, the only day of the week when one bit of the current English healthcare system is not on strike. But I'm going to say that the problems in the NHS are not NHS problems. And by that, I mean that in two ways. First of all, some of the problems are actually pan-European. They're global, but they're particularly prominent in Europe. So Europe has an aging population, a falling birth rate. Medical staff tend to be young, patients tend to be old. As a result, we have too few doctors and other healthcare staff in Europe. The second thing is that the very specific problems in the NHS are not NHS problems. They're problems with social care, and they were identified more than 10 years ago. And some of you might know that previous governments have promised to sort out social care and failed to do it. And that's an important point, because it's a problem really with governance. And then the final thing is this. I Googled medical care, and this is what comes up. And the reason I want to point this out is that both of these pictures have patients and staff in extremely close proximity. And we saw that during COVID, when, although we did some remote work, I still spent quite a lot of COVID in the hospital. And in fact, one of the problems with thinking about the digitization of medical care and the use of AI is that that final meter of medical care is really very resistant to technology introduction. Okay, so where does that get us? The idea of robot laser surgery is still pretty much science fiction, which is why the picture was done with the lights out. So AI-only care is really difficult. Healthcare is largely delivered by the young to the elderly, as our tax flows. There's a cross-generational fairness issue there. But what AI can do is it can augment, improve, and improve the development of healthcare. But if we go back to that William Gibson quote, if you want to make healthcare and AI-enabled healthcare widespread, safe, and accessible, you need a set of policies, beliefs, attitudes, which I very loosely will refer to as governance. And I'm going to give you some examples. So, top left example is not actually AI, but it probably will be AI based in a few years. So this is Libra. This is an implantable glucose sensor for use in type 1 diabetics, where it measures your blood glucose, sends that to your smartphone, and your smartphone then sends a signal to an insulin pump. So it effectively, you get a closed loop system that replaces insulin. That doesn't use AI at the moment, but you can see that once you've built that system, you can introduce AI into it. One of the things I want to point out there is, how does that system solve that last meter problem? The answer is it enables patients to deliver their own care better. So that is one of the things that AI enables. AI enables doctors and other healthcare staff to deliver better healthcare, but in particular, it offers the potential to allow patients to deliver their own healthcare better. In the top right-hand corner, we've got screening mammograms. So screening mammograms are a really good example of where we have a shrinking workforce, an aging population. The chance of finding anything on a mammogram is less than 1%. So there's a huge amount of looking at normal images to try and find an abnormality. AI is good for that. In the bottom left-hand corner, we have the results of AlphaFold. This is Google's work around simulating protein folding. The reason that matters is it's used in this paper to find potential new antibiotics. So antibiotic resistance is a huge problem. Finding new antibiotics by screening plants is really time-consuming and slow. AI can enable the development of new antibiotics, but also other drugs. And then the bottom right-hand corner is one of my favorite examples of medical AI. This shows that if you use what we call deep learning, which is a way of analyzing images using a computer, you can get better at predicting who's got significant knee pain and therefore might benefit from a knee replacement than if you ask doctors to ask patients, particularly if it's white doctors asking black patients in America, where there are multiple examples of racial bias, meaning that doctors tend to underreport patient symptoms. And so this is a really good example of using AI to de-bias medical care. Okay, so I don't know what the future will hold, but one way of thinking about it might be in two dimensions, one around governance and one around technology. So we might end up in the bottom left quadrant, where technology gets a bit better, but it doesn't really change that much. And we never really solve the governance problems. So you get poor take-up, you roll it out to people who can afford it. There's no good evidence it really works. It's a bit patchy. We might, of course, be able to improve on both of those. We might get better technology, but we might also have better governance. We might have better understanding of the systems that we build. We might think in a more purposeful way about where that technology is deployed and in whose benefit it is used. So what does this mean for us? So the short answer, which I really do want to reinforce, is that healthcare is going to get difficult. And there are structural factors at work. And in fact, although I didn't mention it, climate change is going to make healthcare much more difficult. The healthcare impact of climate change is going to be huge. There are not many doctors in the UK who are used to treating malaria, but we're likely to see an reintroduction of it. But healthcare is going to get difficult because of these structural factors affecting it. I think that AI can help with that. I think it can help with some core infrastructure problems, things like new drugs. It can help with better ways of assessing patients, and it can help by upskilling and enabling patients. So those are three things that AI can do in healthcare. But healthcare doesn't deliver health. And there are some substantial forces that mitigate against the type of governance I think we need. In particular, market forces tend to push against widespread adoption and good evidence generation. And as a final point for people who are still young enough to think about changing careers, AI in healthcare needs medical and tech skills, which kind of sounds obvious, but it needs a lot of other skills. There's a massive gap for people with skills and experience in digital humanities to help us improve and think about AI in healthcare. And there I will stop.
Very good, thank you. Just to put our speakers on notice, I am going to come back to those skills questions and ask you to expand on those in a second. One of the questions we've got is really interesting. I did promise people a tour de force over some of these fascinating areas, and now we shall move on to the next, which is Varun Paul, who is going to talk to us around the world. I don't know if we call it fintech, or I don't know what the right definition is, but Varun, I'm sure you will help us out. Over to you.
Thanks. Thanks everyone for having me. My name is Varun Paul. I am a governor of Merchant Taylors School and a trustee of the Old Merchant Taylors Society. After leaving Merchant Taylors in 2003, I went to study economics at Cambridge and then UCL. I spent 14 years at the Bank of England, and I recently joined a digital asset company called Fireblocks as their director for central bank digital currency and financial market infrastructure. Now, going back to 2019, I published a report while I was at the bank on the future of finance. It covered everything from aging populations to climate change and even AI, all the things we've talked about already. But today I'm going to focus on the bit that talked about money and payments and how you can be fit for the future of finance. Since 2016, there has been a marked decline in the use of cash, from 60% of everyday transactions down to just 15% today. Cash has been replaced by a preference for cards. And over the past 5 years, the accelerated decline in cash has been driven by contactless payments and mobile payments. And it's worth noting here that the data shows a really strong skew towards younger generations using these new types of payments. And believe it or not, there are still 150 million check transactions processed every year in the UK. Now, a decade ago, the government committed to preserving the role of checks, and they've made a similar commitment to cash. So for any of you that are worried, rest assured, you will still be able to get hold of your King Charles tenner in years to come. But make no mistake, the way we are paying for things is changing. And that's before we even mention the word Bitcoin. So what on earth is crypto? What is an NFT? And how can you prepare for the future? Let's start with some definitions, and I'll try and keep this as simple as I can. A cryptocurrency or crypto asset is essentially a token backed by a string of computer code. It uses cryptography to verify ownership and authenticity rather than relying on a third party. To unlock these tokens and transfer them requires a password, or what we call a private key. Now, the record of ownership of these tokens is usually stored on a blockchain. And you can think of a blockchain like a series of servers all around the world connected together by the internet. And in that sense, it is distributed. So it is a distributed ledger. When someone signs a transaction, all of these servers are simultaneously updated. And this kind of distributed system can be more resilient than a single server, because a failure at one server or a hacking incident, because this requires all of those servers to be hacked at the same time. It builds resilience. It can also be great for complex global networks like shipping and logistics. Now, Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the OG, the original crypto asset, a zero knowledge, zero trust method of proving and transferring value. It is designed to be a payment method that does not rely on banks. And it's fundamentally secured by the fact that it takes a huge amount of computing power, time, and electricity to break the cryptography. However, that also means it's not really that efficient for payments, and it's not particularly good for the environment either. Since then, there have been many derivations of Bitcoin, mostly trading off on that between efficiency and security. While many crypto assets are designed to be fungible, like money, that means 2 fivers is the same as a tenner, and you can make change when you go into a shop and spend it. Some crypto assets are specifically designed to be non-fungible or tied to something specific. These non-fungible tokens can be used to prove ownership of a specific item, and they've therefore gained popularity in the market for collectibles. Now, let me stop at this stage and just say, to be clear, I am not here to defend the crypto market. Its history is littered with scams and fraud, from the initial coin offering wave in 2018 to the recent failure of the centralized exchange FTX. As an asset class, it's hugely volatile, and invariably it's retail investors who lose their money. But I do want to talk about the positive use cases of the technology, starting with cross-border payments and remittances. Anyone in the audience today who has tried to make a payment abroad, particularly to a less developed country, knows that it can take days for the payment to arrive, and you can get stung by hefty fees. Today, using a stable coin, that is a type of crypto asset that is tied or pegged to a fiat currency like the dollar, you can send Mexican pesos from a Mexican bank account, convert those to US dollars, and have those dollars arrive in a US bank account in just 12 minutes at a cost of just 20 cents. That will get faster and it will get cheaper. And that could help to make finance more inclusive. We now have banks in Australia who are issuing their own stablecoins backed by deposits and reserves in central banks. And it won't be long before we have trusted stablecoins in every currency around the world. And it will be the people in Nigeria and Ghana and Indonesia and the Philippines who will benefit the most after being locked out of the global financial system by high fees for so many years. But even big companies like Netflix want to use this kind of technology to repatriate all of their subscriber income from around the world. Second, programmable payments. Now, because at the heart of crypto, as I described, is a string of computer code, it means we can do some pretty clever things. We can program a smart contract to, for example, move 10% of the money we earn in our salary to go automatically into our savings or to charity as it arrives in our accounts. Or we can protect ourselves in advance from spending too much on things like gambling. Or even, dare I say it, we can help ourselves pay our taxes on time. We could use this tech to split payments and pay VAT in real time, and maybe even eliminate receipts by programming the details into the transaction itself. And companies like Spotify want to use this kind of technology to pay artists in real time as people listen to the music. Third, tokenized assets. If we create a digital representation of a traditional financial asset on the blockchain, we can actually use this technology to streamline the settlement process in the financial system. The efficiency savings in a multi-trillion-pound global financial system could be huge. And today, the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange is running a pilot to settle government bonds in this way. The other thing we can do is fractionalize assets, break it up into smaller chunks, and in that way, lower the barriers to investment in property, for example. which could help to make home ownership far more accessible. And fourth, NFTs, non-fungible tokens. Although, as I said before, they originally gained popularity in the collectibles market, NFTs are now helping big consumer brands to engage with their customers and to build brand loyalty. Starbucks are using NFTs to revolutionize their loyalty scheme. Nike are selling digital representations of their trainers alongside the real trainer and using that to give special access and special experiences like designing your own trainer next time round. And Man United's partnership with Tezos will soon see them enhancing the match day and post-match experience using NFTs. Now, if this all sounds like science fiction, it's worth noting that just yesterday, the Bank of England published a consultation paper on a digital pound. That is a central bank issued digital currency, a CBDC. There are no plans to get rid of cash, as I said before. And so this will sit alongside cash and stablecoins in a diverse array of payment options in the future. If they launch it, it will serve as an anchor between the different payment systems, just as cash does today, to ensure that even in a digital world, £10 will be worth a tenner, always and everywhere. And it will have privacy built in so that neither the Bank of England nor the government can ever see what you are spending your money on. So there we have it. The financial system and the future of money is changing. But now that you have the inside track, you can be ready for it. Remember that the positive use cases I highlighted all had real life impact and value. So be very wary of schemes that promise to help you get rich quick. That's not what this is about. But be willing to try out new payment methods to understand how they work and get more comfortable with how technology can actually improve the way we interact with money. And that's how you can start to get fit for the future of finance. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you very much. So I think we've heard from three incredibly different backgrounds, but a real common theme that change is here to stay and probably only going to get bigger and bigger. And I think they're calling this new thing Britcoin is the way we're so look out in the papers for Britcoin, which I think is about the current central currency that might be coming our way. And interestingly, just a personal story, I've just been away in Northern Europe and got my Swedish krona to spend and could not spend it. I'm not being funny, I went shop to shop to shop to try and get rid of it. And then the end in the airport, the duty free was the only place I could actually spend the currency. So the world is changing and changing in different jurisdictions. Right, so we're on to questions, and please do add to the chat room. We've got a few, and I think all our speakers can actually see the questions, so they're already preparing their answers. But I'm going to combine two, because I'm really keen to talk about skills. The thing that brings us together is an academic institution, and I'm really keen. So there are two, and if I get your name's pronunciation wrong, apologies. Arian Malhotra, who I believe is a current student, has asked, what education best prepares us for entering tech fields, computer science degrees, data science degrees? And Varun, I'm going to ask you to take that one as really and then there is Markesh Halai, who said, what are the three key skills employers will seek in a future workplace? And my guess is it slightly depends which workplace you're going into. But if you can be thinking about that. So Varun, I'm going to ask you to kick off a little bit around the sort of the computer science, data science, and then conclude with, here are the three key skills I would encourage you to get to. And then I'm going to follow up slightly differently with Matt on Clara, but similar theme.
Sure. So it's a really good question and a difficult one to answer because the world is changing. When I went to uni, everyone wanted to study economics to learn about the financial system. And then there was a financial crisis and things changed. And then there's been a tech boom since. And so the demand for skills does change. The question was specific to tech, I think. And I'd say as a core skill, maths is always going to be important if you're studying at school at the moment. But that leads on to anything that is mathematical at university, whether it's physics, engineering, computer science. These are all really relevant skills, and you don't need to study computer science directly to become a developer and a programmer. the transferable skills you get in any one of these mathematical fields are really valuable. And I know the most sophisticated coders I know often come from different mathematical backgrounds. But I want to caveat that by saying that it is important to have a variety of skill sets, and people who are capable of thinking in a legal way, in a logical way, can bring a lot to the table as well. People who have humanities backgrounds and social sciences backgrounds also bring huge amounts to the table. So I've heard it said that schools are getting too sucked into maths in a way, especially potentially boys' schools, and the breadth is also important. What matters is the transferable skills you gain. And so just to get to those, the three most important skills, I think the transferable skills are going to be the most important. So core mathematical understanding will be key. The ability, actually, I find, to interact with people and present puts a lot of people ahead. And a school like MT's really sets you well for that kind of that ability. So don't downplay that. And my last skill would be, actually, for me, is being able to pull everything together. So taking a step back and be able to connect all the different angles that you can think through, so that you're not just a narrow skill set person, you're the kind of person who can bring together what you've learnt in physics and engineering, but also maths and economics and social sciences and chemistry, because it all comes together, and that's when you can add most value to a company.
Thank you very much. And Matt, I'm going to come to you. And just, obviously this is most relevant to the younger people on the calls, but I think we probably have parents, grandparents, and maybe even great-grandparents on the call. So for you, it's sort of to be able to show off to the younger generation that you understand the world they are entering. So please, I think it's hopefully relevant to all. So Matt, from your point of view, I mean, traditionally, if you're going into medicine, it's all around the sciences. But as we sort of see how it's changing, whether it's robots doing surgery or not, there are different skills. So from someone wanting to enter the medical profession, have things changed in terms of what the core skills? And again, I'm afraid you're going to have to end up with, what are the 3 key skills employers will seek in a future workplace? And Clara, you're next.
So I think it's a good question. It's a very difficult question to answer. Medicine has traditionally demanded science A levels, but medicine is not a science. It is an art with a scientific underpinning. And one of the things about medicine is you are expected to be familiar with the science, to be able to handle science. But what you actually need to be able to do is you need to be able to talk to patients. And that's the key kind of skill. I think the only other useful piece of advice I've ever read is there's a technologist called Paul Graham, who once said, if you're ever given a choice between doing 2 courses, choose the one that puts you more upwind. So his choice was between maths and economics. And his argument was that if you did maths, you could pick up the economics. If you did economics, you'd never pick up the maths. And I just say that because my PhD was in computer science, and we do a lot of AI development. And although it's true that there are a lot of good programmers who haven't done computer science as a discipline also sets you up with some very robust underpinnings that probably won't change as much over the next 20 to 30 years. The fundamentals of algorithms aren't going to change very much over the next 30 years. So that's just worth thinking about. What are these long-term things? In terms of the most useful skills, the skills that distinguish our very best trainees are all of the soft skills. It's about being able to stand up and give a talk, being able, in medicine in particular, to be empathic in your interactions with people. And then the third one, which Varun, I think, talked about that ability to pull it all together, which is kind of sometimes a little bit of project management. So I will be clear that the single most educational thing I did at medical school was I ran a theatre company, because it essentially made you do practical project management twice a year without any money, which turns out to be quite a good training for working in the NHS.
Thank you very much. So get your training in the theatre company is the moral of this Fit for the Future, which was not where I thought it was going, Matt, but you've taken us in a slightly different direction. So Clara, bring us back to non-theatre. Well, maybe not. I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, which is one of the things that the three panelists have in common, and indeed I do myself, is sort of proximity to the private sector, proximity to the public sector. We've all effectively at some point in our life ultimately paid for by the taxpayer, but also in the private sector. Do you think it's important upfront to determine where with those you want to go? Do you think being flexible around your career and moving between it is easy? And then what skills do you need? And ultimately, what are the three key skills? So to give us, and you sort of touched on this in your journey, but if you can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I've worked in all, I guess, all three areas. I've worked pure private, I mean, I currently still work pure private sector. I've worked quasi-government, and I've worked in sort of development. So I have definitely traversed across. It wasn't easy historically, Andrew. I think it is getting easier. And you see this just as an illustration, you see this in curricula. If you look at, I've got an MBA, for example, if you look at business school curricula now, it has sustainability and ethics and things within the courses rather than, an add-on that you might choose. I think that's changing. So I think that there is a recognition in some of the sort of master's level, more practical oriented degrees that you need to have a combination of these experiences. But I would actually encourage people, and this goes back to comments made by both Varun and Matt, what I was hearing from both of you, and I didn't think of a theatre company, although I love that. But I was hearing you both say you need a mix. And it's no longer, it used to be a team takes all kinds, right? It used to be that we used to look at people and pigeonhole them and say, that's their skill set. And actually what matters is that you bring together a mix of skill sets in a team. I think we've now got even more sophisticated in the workplace, and we're saying we actually need a person to have a mix of skills. And we're recognizing that the people who can blend things can often stand out and succeed more. And so I'm going to give an illustration of that to come to your question around what are the three most important skills. I mean, in my industry, in finance, you do need to know financial modeling, just to be clear. We build big financial models. That is important. So I do not want for a moment to underplay some of these core technical skills that just do matter for different disciplines. And you need to master those because they're your baseline. However, to Matt's point, where you stand out is typically not on those core skills. It's on these other skills. And I have had a really interesting experience I wanted to share recently. We put our entire team through, our entire firm, through what I can only describe as psychological training. We had a psychiatrist and team come into the office and spend whole days with us over the course of a year to teach us how our brains work. And I don't know if I'm going to get the statistic right, so you're not allowed to quote me on it. But one of the most astounding things they told us was that 70% or thereabouts of your behavior in the workplace is driven by what's going on for you in your life outside of work. And even in cases where you think, how can that be? I'm a workaholic. Actually, that is then what is driving the way that you're behaving at work. The fact that you don't have enough of a life, perhaps outside of the workplace. And I thought it was they unpacked that with much more eloquence and detail than I'm giving you now. But it was a good example for us of the need to, and we often don't appreciate this as a skill, but the need to learn how to live in a balanced way. And that varies depending on who we are. So there's no one definition of balance, but the need to figure out what is it that makes us content? What is it that makes us healthy? And how do we stay in line with that in our life while we're working very hard so that we can perform the best at work? There is absolutely a relationship between those two things. And I think it was one of the most successful trainings we've ever done, Andrew. And I now, when I'm recruiting, use what they taught us about the brain and how someone behaves and how they communicate as part of our assessment.
Thank you. When you say don't quote you on it, you have been recorded, so we don't need to quote you on it.
I just don't want anyone to hold me to the statistic.
I'm joking. Don't worry, we won't quote you on it. And just someone has volunteered saying, what about things like problem solving, creativity, and critical thinking, all of which I think we would agree are profoundly important issues to do. So now I'm going to come on to the skeptics. to challenge you all a little bit, with a bit less so you, I think, Matt, but the other two. So Varun, I'll start with you, and then which is, Bitcoin or cryptocurrency has sort of an enigma and excitement. It's the Dutch tulip bubble. What is it that is attracting so much attention? How much of it is noise? How much of it is a real concern? As I say, people of my generation, when I mention that I have sons who are interested in cryptocurrency, or it's a big deep breath, and that's it's an unregulated casino. Tell us why it's causing so much excitement, and where are the truths and where are the myths?
A great question to ask an economist, right? So I think the purpose of it is to democratize finance, right? And one of the things is, in a sense, it's made it too easy to engage with. So what you have is people looking for the next big thing. At the moment, with interest rates having been so low for so long, everyone's been looking for the next big thing, whether it was the tech bubble or everything else since. And this is almost too easy to get behind. So you see a coin or an idea in the digital asset industry, and everyone piles in because they can. There's a fundamental technology that's been out, in the last 2 weeks, all over the news: ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, generative AI. But it's not like it's the kind of thing that we can all go and invest in, right? Microsoft went and bought half the company, but we can't go and do anything about it. And that helps me draw this distinction where people can pile into something and where they can't. And where in the crypto industry they've been able to pile into it, we've got this detachment in fundamental and actual value. And let me try and explain this. As an economist, we think about value in terms of utility. What use has something got? A piece of wood can be turned into something. It has intrinsic value. I can sell it to someone for a value. I can change it into something else and it might have a different value, but it has intrinsic value. We also get changes in value in price when there's a mismatch between supply and demand. And when things are scarce and fixed supplies or shortage of supplies, the demand can push up the price rapidly. So in these kinds of markets, and probably the worst thing about some of these crypto markets is they're designed to have scarcity for this exact point. They want to generate price rises. And so a lot of the cryptocurrencies, the crypto assets, are speculative, and they detach rapidly away from their fundamental intrinsic value. So when you're looking at this market, try and separate between what is speculative, tulip bubble type stuff, where prices do just shoot up and they can easily shoot back down, versus some of the positive stuff that I was talking about, the underlying technologies. There is real value there. And as an economist, trying to explain the difference between these two things is really important. But I think people get driven by the desire to have a punt on something that could be the next best thing.
Thank you. So Clara, I'm going to come to you, which amazingly, from my point of view, there are still skeptics out there around climate change. And getting back to my story in Sweden, you just go somewhere and you see how people are having to change their lifestyles about when the lake is freezing and et cetera, et cetera. When you get a climate skeptic, I mean, some people are just going to be so skeptical. What is the best way to convince someone? As I think you started off by saying, it's now and we are the last generation that can really address it. How do you convince those people that to be fit for the future, you really need to embrace this challenge?
Gosh, it really depends, Andrew, on the personality type. As you say, there are some for whom this has become being a sort of not even a skeptic, but a disbeliever is a political stance, it's an ideological stance. And sometimes that's a very difficult perspective to argue with. Okay. But more often what I encounter is people who just haven't really thought about it that much. And although it can feel like it's everywhere and how can you not be aware, I think for lots of people, it's still not really front and center as an issue. What made me sad actually was that for the first time ever, I found a particular group of friends that I'd never really managed to persuade them this was something they should focus on, Andrew. And, they lamented the fact that they couldn't go skiing this year because there was no snow. And it took that to get it onto their radar. So I'm afraid it really is horses for courses. But I mean, the data is, for goodness sake, if you haven't, read the latest IPCC report. It is issued by an intergovernmental panel, that's the IP, of scientists from countries all over the world. So they have deliberately sought to get rid of bias by having this be scientists from everywhere coming together. And the UN does the sort of the convening of this. And so it's a bit like a giant peer review. You know, they're all looking at each other's perspectives and trying to find common ground. And I would, if you haven't read it, go to the IPCC website, look at the latest report. It is chilling reading. I will issue a health warning. It is really, really chilling if you haven't thought about this in depth before. But honestly, it's pretty indisputable if you read that report. And I encourage you to kind of spread that to those who haven't read it.
Very good, thank you. Right, Matt, so less skeptical for you, but you talked around governance, and you talked about the challenges of governance. And one of the questions, and again, that you have access to this, so could you talk a little bit what you mean by governance in this, and also what when you say there's sort of forces against better governance, can you just unpick that a little bit for us?
Yeah, yes, and that's a perfectly reasonable question, and I was rather woolly in my definition of governance, which I fully accept. When I talk about governance, there are a variety of steps, and those of you who are interested, there are now quite a few publications and guidelines about the ethical development of AI and its deployment. But even in what is a relatively young, relatively fast-moving field, there are already examples of deployed AI systems that have demonstrated very significant racial bias. And this tends to be best seen in the US for a variety of reasons. Probably one of the best examples is the Compass system that tried to predict the risk of reoffending and therefore decided whether you could go on bail or not, and shows that there's a huge racial bias there. There's a very famous but very simple example about how badly your kidneys have to work before you're considered for a kidney transplant. For long-standing historical reasons, that cutoff is set at different levels based on ethnicity, and the reasons for that are long embedded in the past. But it therefore means, and the best example of this, therefore means if you have a mixed race patient, they may or may not be eligible for a renal transplant based on which side of the race barrier you decide to jump, which is clearly very odd. So that's one bit of governance around bias. The second bit is really, and it relates much more to the thing that healthcare doesn't lead to health. So it is possible to spend a great deal of money on healthcare without achieving good health outcomes. There is a large country in North America that spends 17% of GDP on healthcare and has worse maternal mortality than anywhere else in Europe and many other bits of the world. So the real question is, how do we put systems in place that stop desperate people? And I treat a group of people, adult brain tumours are a truly miserable set of illnesses to treat. Our commonest tumour with aggressive treatment has 15 months average survival, and I've treated the parents of 2 MT boys in the last 4 years. So how do you work with a group of people who may be very desperate for an intervention, where I may have developed a piece of technology which is very hyped and sounds very sexy? And how do you avoid me extracting money from people for that because it's not ethical to do it? And at the same time, if I have a piece of technology that works, how do we make that widespread and scale that? How do we avoid digital exclusion? Bearing in mind that the people most in need of healthcare tend to be the poorest bits of society, who are least likely to have access to Wi-Fi and smartphones and things like that. So there's a lot wrapped up in that governance term, but those are some of the concepts I was trying to capture.
Very good, thank you. So I'm conscious we've got only about 5 minutes left, and I promised our panel speakers that we won't run over too much. But so I'm just looking in the chat room, and again, pronunciation, I apologize, but Ricky Dave Shah has asked a question, but he started his question with fantastic talk. And because of that, I'm going to give your question precedent over all the others. Thank you for the feedback. So, and then I'm going to finish with a question for each of you. So Matt, I think this is for you. In terms of tertiary education, what courses could students explore to gain medical and technological knowledge concurrently?
Yeah, I think it's difficult. So the obvious thing, if you want to go down a formal route, is that you do, for example, a medical degree and you do an intercalated year in medical technology or biomedicine or medical engineering or something like that. Equally, if you do a biomedical course, many of those now have a strong medical engineering element, so that allows you to dual track. There are less formal routes. So when I was at medical school, because I became interested initially in mathematics before computing, I started doing an open university degree in maths while I was at medical school, which is one way of doing it. I'm not sure I'd recommend it, and the OU is now much more expensive than it used to be. But there are ways of doing it, and I think there's a much greater appreciation of the way in which the medical disciplines and the technical disciplines need to talk to each other. So as a blatant plug, for which I apologise, Imperial College and the ICR now have a joint, what's called Convergence Science Centre, and that's got a lot of money from CRUK. And the aim there is that Cancer Research UK want us to bring together mainly cancer biologists and physicists and engineers to try and put those two things together. So, for example, this might be about developing micro pumps to deliver chemotherapy directly into tissue. It might be about saying, what can we understand about the physical properties of tissue that influences how cancer grows, which is something we've never really thought about before. You just grow it in addition, see how quick the cells grow. So there is an increasing interest in the interface between those.
Very good. Right. So I'm going to conclude in 3 minutes, because I'm going to ask you each the same question. And this is not a political question, just for the avoidance of doubt. You find yourself in a lift with the Prime Minister, and he says, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what I should be doing relating to your particular field that you've talked about. So Clara sort of addressing climate change, Matt helping with the healthcare challenge, and Varun, you can define this however you want in the rollout of digital currencies. So I'm going to go in the reverse order of when you spoke. So I'm going to go Varun, Matt, Clara, and then unless there's any pressing questions, we will honor the time commitment. So Varun, you go first. You have a minute with the Prime Minister. What messages would you like to share with him?
I'd say the importance of fintech, and it is really high right now. Real opportunity for the UK to show leadership, and I think actually this is one place where Rishi's definitely in the right place. The central bank digital currency is an opportunity to develop a platform for further innovation, but it's really important for the public sector and the private sector to come together, and therefore having the space for innovation and the right regulation and rules around which the private sector can innovate will be really important. The other part, though, is it's really important to have the funding and the right environment and the skills. And I know that's part of their agenda anyway, but it is really important to have funding coming into the good ideas, the innovative ideas, and have the really talented individuals coming through and staying around and helping develop new ideas for whether it is digital currencies or other ways to improve people's financial lives.
Very good, thank you. And Clara, just as a heads up, there has been one question that's come in that I'm going to add a little bit. So you get a minute and 30 seconds. But Matt, over to you. Challenges of healthcare, you have a minute with the Prime Minister.
So we have an amazing opportunity, single payer healthcare system. No one has treatment or dies without us knowing about it. We could link and use that data to transform the way that we deliver healthcare. However, it requires people to trust that we are doing sensible things with their data. It goes back to the governance issue, and handing large data contracts to non-transparent US firms named after an item from the Lord of the Rings is not a good way of doing this. So there is a huge opportunity here, but we also have the potential to squander it. We showed that we could do it in COVID. we used the NHS trials infrastructure and national data infrastructure to lead world-leading trials, and we are in the middle of unwinding that. The second thing is the healthcare market is a worldwide competitive market, and the NHS, while it has some upsides, is very close to becoming non-competitive for employing doctors and nurses, at which point everything else will fall apart.
Thank you. And Clara, apologies, I'm going to throw two questions at you, but the one's just come in, which I think is really quite an important one, and I'm going to read it. A big issue for individuals is the feeling of helplessness. I can minimize my impact on the planet, but whilst many countries are pumping huge amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, I can't make a difference. Is there any prospect of big-scale carbon capture that might make people feel less helpless? So I'd ask you if you would just to address that, and then maybe you only get 30 seconds with the Prime Minister, because we've used up part of your time.
All right, I'll have to be quick. So I understand that you feel that way, and I think many of us do. I guess what I've been trying to communicate on this call is that in ways you cannot even foresee yet, climate will be part of your professional life. And I encourage you to therefore get really up to speed on what's going on. Think about sustainability as a skill set being part of what you might want to add to your other skill sets, and then do everything that you can. I'm sorry to disappoint you that I don't think we're going to see in the near future large-scale carbon capture at an affordable price all around the world. There are some very expensive, this is one of our focus areas, there are some very expensive technologies for carbon capture under development right now. To be honest with you, the cheapest way to sequester carbon is nature. It is an incredibly, people are, photosynthesis, it turns out it's an incredibly well-developed area of science, and nature is our huge hope. The difference in how much you can pay to sequester a ton of carbon, nature can be 10, 20 times cheaper than any technology we are trying to work with right now. So remember that when we talk about landscapes transforming and we talk about the importance of planting trees, it's not trivial. Nature is our greatest hope. I will also end on something very optimistic, and I know I've now run out of time with the Prime Minister, but one of the things that I really hold on to is that if we actually do transition to net zero on the timeframe that the Paris Agreement between countries laid out, within something like 25 years, and I'm again going to ask you not to quote me exactly, but within something like 25 years, something crazy like half of the carbon that we've spewed up there into the atmosphere would fall down. And those numbers aren't quite right, but they are directionally right. And so actually the best chance we have of the global carbon capture we all need is to get on with it and transition and stop talking.
So I'm afraid our Prime Minister has missed out on your advice, Clara, which is a great pity, but time...
Get on with it. Get on with it. Okay, my line to him. I say it again and again.
Very good. Okay, so when I came up with the thought of having a webinar on Fit for the Future, I can honestly say I didn't anticipate that we would have such a great panel that we've had this evening. So I hope for those of you who have listened in, whether now or the recorded version, have enjoyed it as much as I have. And a huge thanks to Varun, Matt, and Clara for sharing their expertise and for taking the questions and for what I thought was really an insightful discussion. Thanks again to Emma and Nick in the Development Office for all their hard work. We have unfortunately with Zoom meetings, the cutoff is quite abrupt. So when I say the meeting's ending, we will all depart at the same time. But once again, to the three of you, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and sharing your incredible insights with us. And to everyone on, good evening and thanks for joining us. Goodbye.